Well, hello, everybody. Thanks. I'm really honored to be here. We got a great group of speakers, and it's good to be asked to speak to you guys. I'm the orthotist who does the CMTA Center of Excellence up in Boston, Massachusetts at the Mass General Hospital. I've always had a focus on CMT my whole career. When I first started as an orthotist, I was at Mass General Hospital, and I just had way more CMT patients than was more than my share, I guess. And I kept asking people about it, and nobody knew much about it. So a friend of mine I asked her how to do some research, and she was teaching me how to do research. And I made friends with the hospital librarian, and she had me get articles. And the next thing you know, I just got sort of a little expertise in it. And that's why I'm here where I am today with sort of I call it my focus and my practice is on CMT. And I said to myself, if I were attending this lecture, what would I want to know about orthotics? And pretty much the biggest thing I'd want to know is what can I really expect from AFOs? And so that's the title of this program is what can I really expect from AFOs? Do I already have the best AFO design for me? Or is there something else out there for me that I'm just not aware of that would be better? And what would be those realistic expectations? Well, ideally, we'd like to see AFOs, sorry, move this over here. AFOs restore the basic elements of normal gait and also restore normal balance. It would be great if all CMTers could just walk normally and have normal balance. This is a video of patient Chuck, and I chose Chuck because he's sort of an averagely involved patient. We can watch him walk and we can identify some of the specific things that limit normal gait for CMT patients. CMT is progressive, and not everybody's going to have all of these, but we may have some of them. If we look at him, we can say, okay, first thing we notice is, foot drop. He's going to try to stand here for us. Also going to notice his balance is impaired. And when I asked Chuck to stand still, he has trouble. He said it's a stutter of his feet. I'm going to move his feet around, stagger a little bit, and he has trouble standing. A lot of CMT patients, and classically, of course, have lateral ankle instability. And that can sometimes turn into a pretty significant deformity of the foot where the ankle rolls laterally and stays there. Fatigue is a big issue for CMT patients. Oftentimes I'll have patients rate these things, which is most important to them. And I'm always surprised how much fatigue is number one for patients. They say, geez, I just can't keep up with my peers. We're going to talk a lot about that. Some people complain, of course, painful high arches and callous feet. Most CMT patients have a specific cavus foot called an anterior cavus foot, which happens from just a specific sequence of muscle loss that leads to that high arch. Hammer toes, they can be painful too. A lot of times patients just have a lack of confidence with walking too. And confidence comes from when the foot hits the ground, it needs to be predictable and it needs to be consistent. And if every time that foot hits the ground, it's always a surprise, of course, you're not going to have much confidence. And also, of course, limited walking speed is another issue that people have. And so for normal gait, I have this wonderful nurse who works at a pediatric hospital with me. And when I first got my GWalk gait analysis system, I was doing everybody. And she used to fly around this hospital, and I put her on the machine, and she had some tremendous data. She's got great gait. And I'd like to talk about just normal gait, or the basic elements of normal gait for a minute. First of all, she has pretty good walking speed. And she has a lot of propulsion when she walks. Also a lot of pelvic motion. Pelvic motion is key. It's key to athleticism and the way we move and keeping all our muscles strong. And as she walks, though, her head and shoulders barely move. They're nice and steady. And that's the new definition of stability in gait. When the pelvis, most of the motion takes place with the pelvis, but the head and shoulders stay nice and quiet. She has a very comfortable natural arm swing, which we're going to talk about and see how important that is too. And she also has what we call dynamic balance, not just static balance, but as she's walking, she can look all around and not have any problem with balance. Specifically, if we look at her walk, and again, we're talking about the basic elements of gait. Gait is very complicated. I mean, if you do studies on gait, you'll see more information, esoteric terms that you won't be able to understand. I'm not familiar anyway, but it gets kind of complicated. But we're just going to talk about the basic elements of gait. And we break down gait into two phases, swing phase and stance phase. And in swing phase, of course, we want to do is prevent the toe from dragging. So we need good toe clearance. And if you don't have the strength to dorsiflex or pick up your foot, then you'll get the toe drag. In stance phase, we're looking for 3 specific rockers, we call them. Everyone should land heel first, and that we call that first rocker. And then when the foot's fixed on the floor, you get second rocker with ankle motion, and third rocker is being able to achieve heel rise. So let's talk about that a little more, and we're going to talk about balance. So balance has, and Stephanie did a nice job covering this too, but I'm just going to reiterate this. There are some basic requirements for balance. The first, of course, is muscle strength. Muscles stabilize our joints. They're the primary stabilizer of our joints, not ligaments, but the muscles are. And we also need them for righting reactions. And everyone knows that if you lean forward, you sort of push your feet down and it rights you back up and get your center of gravity back over your base. If you start to lean back, you sort of pick your toes up and that rights you again, sort of like righting a ship. So those righting reactions are, you need muscle strength for that. On the sensory side, there are 3 things. There's vision, of course. When we can look and see a stationary object, we see how we're moving relative to that object. That helps us with our balance. Vestibular function, of course, is the inner ear stuff. And anybody who's played pin the tail on the donkey knows that happens when you spin somebody around 3 or 10 times and you have them try to walk a straight line. They can't do it because they're spinning the fluid in their semicircular canals and their cochlear, and they lose their balance until it settles down again. Proprioception is the one that CMT patients lose. CMT is called hereditary motor sensory neuropathy because it's not just the muscle strength, of course, it's the sensory part that's involved as well. And proprioception is a part of that. Balance really all comes down to is managing our weight line. Our center of gravity has to be maintained over our base of support or else we'll fall or lose our balance. So what exactly is proprioception? Proprioception is knowing where a body part is in space without looking at it and how it's moving relative to the rest of the body. And in our muscles, we have these special organelles called muscle spindle fibers. And those, I don't get too technical, but those muscle spindle fibers send information about the exact length of a muscle. And that information goes up through our sensory nerves to our spinal cord and brain, where every single muscle spindle fiber is always working and sending the information that tells you exactly where your body is in space. That's how the brain interprets where you are in space. Unfortunately, with CMT, because the sensory nerves stop working, that information never gets there. And so the information from usually your feet and ankles doesn't get to your brain and spinal cord to tell you where you are in space, and that makes balancing very difficult. Now, there are some strategies how to compensate for that. And CMT patients that are challenged or balance challenged with muscle weakness and proprioceptive loss, most of the times compensate by maintaining contact with a stationary object. You know, we always think about the finger on the wall strategy. You know, if you're losing your balance, you reach for the wall or anything that's stationary. Holding on to your spouse sometimes is the number one. That one woman that her husband was her brace. She always held on to him all the time. And I had another patient who said all he had to do was back up against a bush and he could talk to his neighbors for hours. And the other strategy is knee against a coffee table. And there's a scenario I want to propose just for purposes of this discussion. But suppose you're at a dinner party with your boss and you're in his living room and he hands you a drink in one hand and then comes by with a sandwich in the other. And now he wants to talk to you about your raise. And geez, you know, with both hands tied up and nothing to hold on to, a lot of people will, a nice strategy might be to sort of just maneuver close enough to the coffee table that you can put your shin against that coffee table. And that knee against the coffee table or shin against the coffee table, that can compensate just like a finger on the wall. And that's what we call a way to get that in a brace is the same way a ski boot does it. Ski boots give us ground reaction too. And anyone who's skied knows you strap yourself into this boot and the boot reaches up to the top of your shin and of course it's locked into a ski. And if you try to lean forward, you wind up feeling it at the top of the boot on your shin. That's a ground reaction for us that orthotists will talk about a lot. And that's how we control a lot of motion and also help people with sensation loss, especially proprioceptive loss. This is my friend Mark. Mark, this is an old video. I've had this video for several years, but I don't have one that's any better. And I'm going to show you how Mark stands without a brace and then compared to the brace on this right side here, you'll see where a ground reaction AFO is going to help them. So this is Mark trying to get balance here. So Mark's a great guy, and basically when he first started to crouch, and he crouched like that a little bit, that turns on a lot more muscles, proximal muscles around his hip and around his knee, and that's a strategy patients do too sometimes to get balance back, because then those muscle spindle fibers will basically give more information back to the brain and spinal cord to help you with your balance. But we don't want to stand in a crouch all day. It's not the best way to stand. And so here's Mark with a simple traditional style polypropylene ground reaction AFO. And it's going up to one knee. He only has it on the one side. And we're going to see how that improves his balance, his proprioception, his static balance. Now you'll watch his knee look for ground. So finding your balance with the ground reaction of an AFO is a skill you get, sort of like driving a car. I always say the first time I drove a car wasn't very good. But after a few weeks, I was like Mario Andretti and I felt a lot better. It's the same thing with ground reaction, restoring balance. Even if it doesn't seem amazing when you first get it, usually in about 2 weeks, my patients come back and they say, you should see me now, Ken. I can stand now and I really have my balance. It's a great thing. Balance I like to talk about because I had one guy who was one patient who was a very tall, 6'4" attorney. And he would be in court litigating, and he would be defending a drunk driver. And he would turn to the jury, turn to his client, and turn to the judge and lose his balance and stumble. And of course, there he was, embarrassed because he's defending a drunk driver and he looked like he was drunk himself. And so he said, I don't care what you do about anything else. Just give me my balance. I don't ever want to be embarrassed like that in court again. And we could do that. We could give him ground reaction AFOs that made him feel rock solid in court when he was standing. And that was very important to him. So there are all kinds of AFOs out there. And we're going to talk about this. What can you expect from specific types of AFOs? Well, most every AFO you'll see pictured here, and maybe you have some of these yourselves, a simple leaf spring AFO, or what we call a solid ankle AFO. This is that ground reaction AFO with that rigid anterior shell. The IDEO from Hanger over here, a simple silicone SAPHO. These really nice ground reaction AFOs from Allard. The DR3 from Marmaduke out in San Diego, and they go on and on. Here's the double helix that works really well. Simple exoskeleton AFOs, and of course, even a custom articulated AFO. All these braces will help in swing phase. There isn't one here that won't. It'll help you with that toe pickup, but that's only 40% of our gait cycle, and we want to do more. Really helping CMT patients walk better comes down to managing stance phase. And in stance phase, we're going to talk about those 3 stance phase rockers. So in normal gait, we're looking for first rocker, and you'll see here how in this illustration in red here, when the heel hits the ground, you're supposed to get this slow, controlled plantar flexion of the foot as the foot comes down to the ground. If you don't have strong enough muscles to control that lengthening of that muscle, you will get a foot slap. And Chuck, the guy on our first video, he owns a machine shop, and he would have to get down on the floor to talk to his machinist every so often, and they all heard him coming because of the slap, slap, slap. And when he got there, you know, if he didn't have anything to lean onto, he was more focused on managing his balance than he was on what they were even talking about. So it was very difficult. But that first rocker prevents that foot slap. I don't want to go too off topic here. Second rocker is when the foot is fixed on the floor. the leg and the body up above advances over the foot to a certain point, when prior to the leading foot making heel strike, we achieve heel rise of the stance phase foot. Heel rise is what's called third rocker, and it is really important. It seems a little insignificant sometimes, but that one simple little action there is responsible for most of our propulsion. Many authors, Donlan especially, these authors, they write about propulsion, and far and away, this ability to achieve heel rise, where you can get up on your toe in single limb support with one foot in the air, is responsible for nearly 70% of your propulsion. Now that translates directly into gas mileage. That's where fatigue comes into it. You can get 70% better gas mileage if you can get that heel off the ground when you walk. And some AFOs can help us with that, and that's what we're going to talk about. So here's a simple custom PLS AFO. And you see, if we compare this to what these normal rockers require, we can see that it really doesn't give much for ankle instability, but it will give us a control first rocker. It'll restore first rocker. It'll also give us second rocker, but it's really not strong enough to give us heel rise, or third rocker. And of course, there's no ground reaction to help us with proprioceptive loss and balance. So for this brace here, if your CMT only involves your weakness of dorsiflexors, this would be a great design for you, because it's just going to do that. It's going to keep the foot up in swing phase, restore first and second rocker, no more foot slap, but it's not going to help you with the propulsive piece or the balance. And so that's what you can expect from this design type of AFO. Now, an articulated AFO, that's articulated simply means it's got a joint to it. So it has a joint here and some limited motion. This articulated AFO usually has doesn't allow the foot to drop down. So it'll have a stop in the back. It can't drop down. And when you step on it, it holds your foot up. Holds your foot up. Well, let's talk about it. It'll give you good ankle stability. Oh my God, we can strap it, we can hold it, we can keep the ankle from rolling laterally or medially. But it really won't give us first rocker because it doesn't allow the foot to drop down. It also doesn't give us second rocker because it's such a small percentage, it doesn't count. And it's free dorsiflexion, so it won't give us any heel rise. It also has no ground reaction, so it won't help us with proprioception. And so, I don't know if I mentioned that, but this is the most commonly prescribed brace in the country right now for not just CMT, but every disorder. And unfortunately, it doesn't help us with any of our stance phase rockers. It helps us with our balance. So it's not a good design in general for CMT patients. Now, dynamic carbon AFOs, I call myself a dynamic carbon enthusiast, is the only bracing design that really restores everything we need for a CMT patient, which is ankle instability, ankle stability, yes. It'll certainly give us first rocker, second rocker, and is strong enough with this ground reactive piece in the front to give us third rocker. And also because it's a ground reaction brace, it helps us with our static balance and even our dynamic balance. So we have a lot of good success with this. Actually, I take these braces with me to the clinic, and we're able to trial them on patients right then and there and see if it's going to be beneficial for that particular patient. Oops, I go back. You know, in general, and we're going to talk about this a little later, you know, there are all kinds of carbon braces. They're not all created equal, certainly. If the AFO is in the front of your leg, like over here, it's going to be different than if it's a simple cuff and a strut in the back of your leg. If it's in the front of your leg, it's going to be able to offer this ground reaction for heel rise and help us with balance. And of course, restore all three of these stance phase rockers. Yay for the ground reaction style brace. Now, if you don't need that much, if you're minimally involved with CMT and you simply have a foot drop problem and maybe some mild instability, then this would be a better design for you. And the cuff will be on the back, and that'll help us with first and second rocker. So if your carbon brace looks more like this, you know what to expect. And if it looks more like this, you know what to expect. And a great question I get all the time, and many people are just fearful to want to wear bracing even to begin with. A lot of times it's because a parent or somebody they know had a bad experience with AFOs, but often too they're always concerned about, will this AFO make me weaker? Will I become dependent on it? I want to keep what strength I have. And there was a study done, 6 years ago now, in Laura Sherman Review, that was based on this one woman. Her name was Beth DeLorean, and she was a marathon runner. Now, she didn't have CMT, she had a spinal cord injury, but she kept going into using different style braces when she was running. And she kept saying, when I have a plastic brace, it seems like my leg gets smaller. The study was on calf circumference. And she said, and then when she went to the carbon brace, she said her leg got bigger. And at first, everyone said, no, that's impossible. But she said it enough that it prompted a very short trial. I'm sorry, it was only 8 weeks and only 19 patients. Right now, there's a multi-year, bigger study going on. But everyone had the same result. They said when they went with carbon braces, their legs got bigger. And when they were limiting thermoplastic AFOs or braces that limited motion, they got smaller. And what we can deduce from this is that it's certainly the carbon AFO doesn't reverse the disease process. No one's going to get their nerve back or their muscle back that they've lost. But it's not those muscles that are making the change. What we assume now, it's all those other muscle groups, those synergistic muscle groups that work with the muscles involved with CMT and antagonistic groups that work with them at the same time. They got bigger and stronger because the muscles were working more normally. And by normally, what I mean by that is they were lengthening all the way and shortening all the way. And I like to use as an example, if I wanted to have big biceps and, for the beach, I would, I'd probably go to the gym and get a dumbbell, and I would lengthen my arm all the way on the doorbell, and then I would shorten it all the way. You lengthen it and shorten it. And that's what makes the muscle get stronger when it goes to its normal range under load. And I didn't mention it earlier, but most CMT patients, when they don't wear braces and they're getting weaker and losing sensation, they tend to guard their pelvis. And I talked about pelvic motion earlier. We're going to talk about it more. But when you guard that pelvis and you're walking kind of stiff, your muscles aren't lengthening and aren't shortening, and that's when you get weaker. So you can get weakness of muscles that really aren't even involved with the CMT process. It's just they're getting weird from what we call disuse atrophy. This is a picture of me on the right. I am an identical twin. I have a genetically identical twin brother. And I always thought to myself, wouldn't it be nice to compare truly identical patients with different AFOs and sort of see the results? And just a year and a half ago, it happened at our clinic in Boston. And in came these two brothers that were identical twins. And I was treating one with a brace, and then his brother came in and we got to compare the two. And here they are. And this is Fred on the left and his brother on the right. I forget his name now. But we're going to watch them walk, and you'll see that they are pretty much identical. And we're going to talk about this as we watch them walk. Now, they're pretty involved. They've got pretty much weakness in all three compartments of the leg, meaning that they can't walk on their heels, they can't walk on their toes. They've also got enough sensory loss that their balance is greatly involved. They can't maintain static balance. Your neurologist and people will do what we call a Romberg test. They'll have you stand with your hands on your hips, eyes open, then eyes closed, and see if you can maintain your balance. Both of these guys would fail that test. And then you see the side view as they walk. Same speed, which is nice and slow. They look really identical without wearing AFOs. So now we're going to look at them over here with AFOs. Pause this. And you'll notice this bracing that I fit Fred with on the left is a ground reaction dynamic carbon AFO. And Fred, his brother over here, just had the regular ones around the back. But he had a dynamic carbon AFO as well, but it wasn't a ground reaction AFO. And here I'm just asking them to walk together. And Fred in the blue shirt is slowing down a little bit for his brother because Fred has more confidence when he's walking. Fred's confidence is better because of the ground reaction piece. And you'll watch him walk. And coming back, I'm going to ask them to, I think I'm going to ask them walk more quickly. And you'll get to see the side view. Now, his brother certainly has no more foot drop. That's all being taken care of. But his confidence isn't there. without that ground reactive piece. Now I'm going to ask him to walk quickly, and here Fred likes to show off and show how fast he can walk. So walking speed. Now I'm asking him to stand in open space, and Fred can stand in open space nicely because he has ground reaction on the front, and his brother has to hold on to the wall. And so, you know, what can you expect from different bracing designs? It can be quite a bit. Expectations can be much more for a ground reaction AFO than the one behind. Sorry, my next one here. There we go. Go back again. Yeah. You know, a question comes up, do I need any special training with AFOs? Or can you just, is the AFO the magic, or is there training involved too? And the answer is very much training is involved with the AFO. And I use this as an example. I say, if I gave you all Apache helicopters fully armed, it'd be wonderful. But without the training to use it, it wouldn't have much value. Most patients walk the same way with a new AFO as they did before. And the reason is because the gait compensations that CMT patients learn just to be as functional as they can be, considering all the doubts they have, is just amazing. And also those gait compensations, the way they're walking with those gait compensations, it's familiar, it's habit, and it's safe. And moving your pelvis or your center of gravity forward is terrifying for patients with CMT because they're not sure what's going to happen, usually going to end up with a fall. So with the new AFO, patients need to experience that corrected gait with the AFOs in order to really know what's possible. And that has to happen in a very safe environment. And that's why we do that initial training in our office when we're fitting these braces. And that gait training, I usually have a couple of military analogies that I use. First of all, when you stand a parade rest, nice and tall and straight. And if you look at the soldier to your left, he's at parade rest. His pelvis is forward. His shoulders and head are over his base. And if he was wearing AFOs, he'd be leaning against the front of that ground reaction AFO. If you compare that to a gorilla, who is much stronger than a man, and he sort of stands with his butt in the back seat there, all these muscles are turned on trying to stabilize him right now. His hip extensors, his knee extensors, his low back muscles, they're all working because he's not managing his weight line. If you look at the soldier on the left again, he manages weight line very well, and it takes almost no muscle activity to stand like that. Very little muscle activity, which is why I always say there's a Roman general who I invented for purposes of this discussion too. And I say he taught his soldiers how to do two things, how to stand and how to walk. And when you're taught how to stand, you stand at parade rest, because you can stand like this for a long, long time and not get tired because there's so little muscle activity required. And so it's a wonderful thing to stand up nice and tall, hands behind your back, and it takes very little muscle activity. The other thing when you're walking, as Sane Grainol noticed, and on the right you'll see, is he introduced contralateral arm swing. Contralateral arm swing is key to power in your legs. And it's complicated how it happens, and I won't go into it here, but it's the way all the muscles need to lengthen in order to have the power to contract more powerfully. And so soldiers are taught to walk, and this is an exaggeration here, but with their hands 12 inches in front and 12 inches behind, and that gives them more power. These soldiers could then walk longer, carrying longer loads and not get so tired because their muscles were more efficient at doing it. And if anyone's ever tried to run and not swing your arms, you see it's kind of difficult. But this is an exaggeration of somebody who's running, obviously. But when we run, we swing our arms because that's what gives our legs the power. If you try to move your arms in the wrong direction, you can't run. So arms and contralateral arm swing is really key to getting more power. And when you have an AFO that puts your feet basically on automatic pilot, so you're going to have restoration of all three stance phase rockers, and it's going to be predictable, and it's going to be consistent. You will then have the confidence to move your pelvis and move your arms and walk more confidently. But without those pieces, you won't do it. You can't do it. Pelvic motion is key. And anyone who gets fit with a brace at my office, where we talk about pelvic motion a lot, it's instinctively attractive to us. I always say there's a reason why men like to watch women walk away. And it's not just men. Yes, women too, and I use John Travolta because when John Travolta is walking down the street and his pelvis is moving, it looks good to girls too. It's like, I think it's instinctively attractive because it tells us there's a good, strong, healthy possible mate for us there. And so pelvic motion is key, especially side-to-side pelvic motion. The pelvis should follow the leading foot, not the shoulders, because, and unfortunately, too many times with CMT patients, their shoulders follow instead of the pelvis, and their head is moving too much and their pelvis isn't moving enough or going the wrong direction. So here's our friend.
You're at 30 minutes. You're halfway through.
Yeah, thank you. Here's our friend Chuck again, and he's going to be walking here. And you notice he's quite happy in his AFOs. He smiles a lot. But look what we've done. He's going to balance here for us. I asked him to stop short, and it's easy for him stopping short. And I'm going to ask him to look up at the ceiling, hands on his hips, look at the ceiling tiles over his head, or left and right. And he feels very confident standing there in those AFOs as opposed to he was before. You know, the AFOs also, of course, take care of that foot drop and swing phase. They eliminate any ankle instability. And they're not for everybody. I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But his balance is greatly improved. And not just his static standing balance, but his dynamic balance as he's walking. With the restoration of heel rise, that third rocker we talked about, he gets much less fatigue. And he gets that normal propulsion when he walks. And the confidence comes again from when the foot hits the ground. If every time it's predictable and it's consistent, and you notice he doesn't have that downward gaze. He lost that habit a while ago. And he has that great pelvic motion too as he walks. And so that's what you can expect from a carbon AFO. And with a dynamic ground reaction carbon AFO. I forgot to include, and I'm sorry about this, what happens if someone's not a candidate for a carbon AFO? And who would be those patients? Who would those patients be? Well, when would a carbon AFO not be appropriate for me? And the answer is, if you can't manage the weight line, if you can't correct the heel and the forefoot and line it up underneath the foot, if you have too much deformity that the weight line is going to fall one way or the other, then you're really not going to be able to use a carbon brace like this. You're going to have to either have a very elaborate carbon brace or more of a traditional thermoplastic type of AFO. And that's about it, Jonah.
Thank you, Ken. That was a great presentation today. And we have a number of questions in the chat function. So I'll just start with the first question that came in and we'll do our best to work our way through them. And if anyone else has questions, please feel free to type them in the chat function now. And we have some of the questions are a little more specific in nature, but we'll ask them and we can certainly help provide any follow-up as well. The first question that came in was about Ottobock braces. We have a community member asking about them. Their child has CMT 4A, 13 years old, and they're really severely affected. And they're questioning whether they should get this type of brace.
Ottobock brace. Ottobock makes several different types of braces. And I don't know what specific type they're talking about, but they make carbon braces. They make the C brace, which is a microprocessor control for, when people don't have any knee stability. The most common one I use from Ottobock is called the Ottobock Reaction Plus. And it's a great, it's a very good dynamic carbon ground reaction AFO. The unique thing about it is it has a medial strut instead of a lateral strut, meaning that the strut comes down on the inside of your foot, where your big toes, the big toe side, as opposed to the little toe side. And for patients who have too much varus instability and their ankle goes out to the side, you can sometimes put a strap to that and do some posting, and the strut is never a problem. It works very well. So I do like those Ottobock Reaction Plus AFOs. I think they help a lot of patients who have a lot of weakness in the foot, but not too much deformity.
Then we have another question from a community member who says they fall a lot and they have weak thigh muscles. So they're wondering what some of the better options may be for them in terms of braces and the such.
Great question. So, again, most people don't get too much weakness above the thigh, but it does happen. And And when that happens, you can certainly use a ground reaction AFO to help stabilize the knee to a point. But if that doesn't work, you're really looking at probably what we call a stance control KAFO, which would be a brace that would go above your knee. Ottobock makes probably the most sophisticated one out there, but that's called the C brace. It's very expensive, and it's not covered by insurance at this point, but they're about $90,000 a piece. But it works the same as their prosthetic knee joints do, to help stabilize amputees with the same technology. So unfortunately, if a ground reaction AFO, or brace below the knee, doesn't work, then you're probably looking at a KAFO with either some sort of locking mechanism to support the knee and keep it from buckling.
And then we have another question from a community member about 3D printing of shoes, options for that for patients living with CMT with foot deformities. I don't know anything about that, unfortunately. 3D printing we're using it very little, just for some cosmetic things and prosthetics. We're not using it to make shoes. And I don't know anyone who does. I don't have any experience with it anyway. But I can say this. If you can 3D print a shoe or even an insert or something that can help manage the weight line. And what that means is, say your ankle is rolling outside. If you have your foot has deformity with the first raised plantar flex, you can make a nice custom base that can help correct the hind foot to manage the weight line a lot better. And that can be done the traditional way with 3D printing, CAD CAM, however you get there. The idea is to manage the weight line as you walk, as you stand. Yeah.
Also, make sure to, I don't know if you're already aware of this, but there are shoes with extra depth, which I know your original question was about, shoes for the CMT foot. And I only wear shoes with extra depth. It's not always perfectly easy to find them, but there are a lot of options out there. New Balance has extra depth. There's a lot of companies. So just make sure your shoes are extra depth.
Well said, Jonah. Yeah, and I always have to have the shoe talk with people that come in, because not every shoe is going to work with an AFO. You really need a lot of extra room. Shoes are designed to fit a foot and a sock, and we're putting a lot more stuff in there. So you've got to get the volume to do it. Yeah.
All right. We had another question come in. A member had to quit golfing, and they were wondering if AFOs could help get them back on the course.
That's a great question. And I do have a guy who says he got 2 strokes taken off his game wearing carbon AFOs. And another guy just came in recently who said he wasn't even going to try it. He didn't want to. But it's very, unique. But these carbon AFOs work really well on level surfaces. If you're on a slope, it's less so. But if you're on the greens or you're teeing off, an AFO can give you much better balance. It's not going to restrict your motion, and you should be able to move nicely with it. And so, yeah, I would definitely start at the driving range and see how you do with it.
All right, and then we have 2 questions that are kind of related. One was about when to get evaluated for AFOs. At what point of the progression of the disease would you recommend that? And then related to that was this community member was told by a PT that if they get AFOs, that the progression could get worse and worse, and it'll do work for for their muscles essentially, and the progression of the disease will get worse. So is there truth to that?
Yeah, so let me go. I'm going to go back to what I alluded to earlier when I was showing you that study, that 2014 study about calf circumference. This is what it's all about. And the truth is, if you're in an AFO that's immobilizing your foot, you will get more disuse atrophy. So the nice thing about the carbon AFOs is they only limit the motion to a normal amount. But if you're in a brace that's going to immobilize the foot somehow, we think about solid ankles or even jointed AFOs that are limiting heel motion. You can get weaker from wearing those braces. And that's what that study was all about. The thing is, when does the functional improvement outweigh the getting weaker? And some patients that come to you, they said they didn't want to get weaker, but they already were graded at 1 or 2 over 5 in strength anyway. So it really was a negligible amount of more weakness they could get, that's the time to really go into a brace. When I think of my pediatric population, I think about two things. I think of function, stop them from falling and being so clumsy. That's typically the first complaint you hear. Oh, my child is a little more clumsy than their peers. They're falling and they're losing their balance a little bit more. And if their parents, if the parent they're inherited it from is a person who has some, equinovarus deformities, some plantar flexion of the first raise, loss of arch, really high arch, there are some things you can do as an orthotist to put forces in place as the child's growing to limit the amount of deformity that the foot will have. And so even if it's a simple thing like just an insert that goes inside someone's shoe, if we can put something in there that creates a force to counteract what we can predict is going to happen, then it's worthwhile to brace kids early that way. Now, I'm not saying immobilizing anything, but if the ankle is starting to turn to the side and you're going to get a lot of fixed deformity, it's good to treat that orthotically as early as you can and try to stop that deformity from progressing.
Thank you. And we have a couple of questions about specific types of braces. One community member was asking about the Arizona brace and when that is appropriate. And then another community member was asking for your opinion on the TurboMed type.
Great questions. The Arizona brace was originally, it's an ankle gauntlet. It's basically a plastic and leather sandwich. What it is it's leather on the inside, leather on the outside, but it has plastic on the inside. It was originally designed for patients with arthritis or some varus or valgus instability of the ankle. The thing is, it does kind of immobilize the foot, and it's heavy and it's kind of bulky. I would think there are more dynamic versions of a brace that I would prefer for patients with Charcot-Marie Tooth disease. The other one, the TurboMed, is a great option for some patients. It was invented by a guy in Canada who had a complete foot drop. And this is a really active guy. He was up in Canada. He liked to run up mountains, over boulders and stuff like that. And most braces didn't have enough dorsal assist, toe pickup assist to get him up over those rocks. And they were kept breaking too. And he invented this brace made out of a very durable, very compliant plastic that attached to the outside of a shoe. It's the only really what we call exoskeletal AFO that we use on a regular basis. And it's great for someone who just has the foot drop piece. If you just have some foot drop and some mild medial lateral instability, it can be a fabulous brace. One guy I have in it, he works for the Army Corps of Engineers. And he, when he's not, in a quarry somewhere or walking on a jetty or walking on even terrain like that, he's in a business meeting and he has to wear dress shoes. So he needs a brace that can go on a lot of different types of shoes, from boots to dress shoes and casual shoes. It works really well for him. The thing about that brace is it doesn't do is it's not going to help anybody with plantar flexure weakness. If you can't walk on your toes, it's not going to give you much help for propulsion. It'll also won't help you much with balance because there's no ground reaction piece to help you with the balance piece. So for certain patients, that they call it the X-Turn now, is a great brace. It works really well.
And then a question came in, if you can still walk well with the more minimal AFO, is that a better design or is the ground reaction always better?
The ground reaction is better, I say, if the disease has progressed to the point where you can't walk on your toes or you just plain need better balance. If your static balance is so poor that it's embarrassing for you to be in court, for example, or something like that, then yeah, you need to go to the ground reaction. But if you just have, foot drop, and maybe a little mild varus valgus instabilities, then you don't need the ground reaction piece.
All right, thank you. And then we have a question on the Allard Blue Rockers. There's a community member that has them and they keep cracking every 1.5 years. They're very active, they hike, but they're looking for something that, they love the carbon fiber design, but they're looking for a new AFO with the flexibility in the foot plate, but also with the carbon fiber design that will last longer.
I am too. Allard is my go-to brace, and the Blue Rocker is for my patients who have these problems is my go-to at that point. But I do have a lot of what we call Blue Rocker breakers. And some people, they break them in a matter of months and they need a new replacement. Allard has a wonderful warranty. They will replace it twice within 1 year if necessary. But for patients who have what we call a 5-year rule from Medicare and Tufts and other insurance companies that have a 5-year rule, it's a real problem. Unfortunately, what I do with my patients is that I just, whatever it costs me, I'll pass it on to them to get a replacement at that point. But there's nothing that really walks as well as that blue rocker right now that I can find. There are a couple of things that are working pretty well. It's just a little bit more involved. One is called the NeuroSwing AFO. And my colleague, David Meisner, who I know you know well, Amy, he wears it himself. He has CMT. And unfortunately, with this brace, it's a wonderful brace. It works with an ankle joint that can have the same effect as the blue rocker because you'll be able to control both of those rockers nicely. But there's a breakage problem with that as well. And unfortunately, from what David tells me, it's hard to get covered. Apparently, there's a $2,500 amount that does not get covered by insurance. So if you needed two of them, you're looking at $5,000 on top of what would bill your insurance to get it covered. The other brace is a brace any other bracing design that uses a carbon strut. Hanger uses a brace called the Ideo, and it works really well to function like a ground reaction blue rocker. It's much more durable, much more expensive, but it works really well. Another one is from a company called Fabtech, and they make a brace with what they call a PDE. I forget what it's called, dynamic element. And it uses a carbon strut in the back. It has to be incorporated into a plastic foot plate and another shell, so it can be a little more bulky, but they're quite durable and they work really well. So Fabtech, their PDE, or the Hanger Ideo is a good option for these patients who keep on breaking blue rockers.
Thank you.
I wear those last ones you just talked about, and they have changed the game for me. They're the strongest I've ever been in.
Oh, the Hanger Ideo. Hey, that's a great brand. It's wonderful. The PDE, yeah, that's terrific. Yeah, I'm having good luck with it myself. Yeah, thank you, Jonah. I like the demonstration.
That was not planned, by the way. So we have a community member that wrote in, they have CMT-X and they just had ankle fusion. So they're asking, what will that do to the second phase? Next phase?
Second rocker? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it depends on what was fused. So we like to avoid fusions with CMT. Sorry. Like to avoid fusions with CMT. But if they had a fusion, if it's a subtalar fusion, fusions are great. Realignments are great. Osteotomies are great. They can realign the foot and help improve the weight-bearing line, but often it won't help much with that proprioceptive piece, that balance piece, or the strength piece. If they can't get plantar flexion, it won't help with that either. So sometimes you need a carbon AFO just to augment the correction of your fusion. Unless, of course, you've had a complete ankle fusion, in which case there's not much you can do. If the entire ankle and foot is fused, you're just going to walk with a sock and a shoe because it's taking the place of a brace.
All right, and then we have a couple more questions here. One is asking about your favorite brand of AFO or brands of AFO that you recommend patients. This particular person said they have fairly severe supination.
Fairly severe supination. So the question I would want to know is, can they walk on their toes, and how bad is their balance? If they can't walk on their toes, then they're going to need a ground reaction carbon AFO, and the Allard Blue Rocker is my go-to. If they can't tolerate the lateral strut, I will use the Ottobock Reaction Plus. And that can be used with a nice, soft, comfortable T-strap that helps hold the ankle. And you get the same function out of it. You get the same restoration of all three stance phase rockers, and that's great ground reaction for balance. So those two work really well. There's some other braces out there too. Spry Step from Tuan is another good option. So yeah, it depends on the deficits that you have as to actually which type you would want to go with. But the Blue Rocker is my go-to.
Then we have another question about your opinion on the NeuroSwing AFO and if you use those.
I was talking about that earlier. And again, David Meisner up in Albany, New York has the most experience that I know with it up there. The NeuroSwing is a wonderful concept. It's a great brace. But what I'm told is it's having a breakage problem as well, which they're working on. It works by using a big ankle joint on the side, and you can adjust how much resistance into dorsiflexion and plantar flexion you get. It's very strong in transverse plane, so it's a wonderful design, but it is breaking and it's more expensive. It's not all the way covered by insurance because of that non-covered piece that costs about $2,500 per side. So you're looking at about $5,000 on top of what they would bill your insurance to get it covered. But I think it's just things are going to have to change, and then it could become more of a mainstay in our arsenal, so to speak.
Well, we have a number of comments coming in thanking you. We still have questions to go through, but I didn't want to miss the opportunity just to pass those along. People really appreciating your expertise, you spending your time with us today, coming directly from our community members. We do have a question again about blue rockers. A community member wears the blue rockers, but their right ankle rolls out and the bar really bothers them, and they're super active. So they're asking what other types you might suggest. They don't wear every day. This is really only for long hikes and walks.
Yeah, so to avoid that pressure on that lateral strut, I've employed a lot of strategies to alleviate that problem. The blue rocker really should be provided with a custom foot orthotic. I do it every time. And if you can wedge the foot over, you can manage the weight line better so it won't roll and hit that strut so much. If the foot orthotic also has a strong enough lateral wall to it, you can actually hold the foot away, because we take that foot orthotic and we will fix it to the foot plate so that you literally can't hit the lateral strut. If all those options are exhausted and you're still hitting the strut, then you need to go to a medial strut. And for that, I'd recommend that Ottobock Reaction Plus. It gives very similar effect to it, very similar function out of it, and it can work really well to avoid that lateral strut issue.
I have a question really quick. Is there something that Hanger could make like the NeuroSwings with that little ankle joint? Could they make their own? Because my orthotist kind of thinks he can. He has his own little mechanism that he thinks he can put together some NeuroSwings. Is that something that you recommend or recommend not happening?
Lacey, it's a great question. And, you know, I don't know who the orthotist is, or he wants to take the NeuroSwing joint and build the brace himself, in other words. Yeah, because they're having a lamination problem where they're having it made. The thing about it is, if you're willing to gamble and spend the money on it, it may be worthwhile to find out how we can do it. You know, will he guarantee it? Will he warranty that it won't break?
Right. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know all that, but I'm the one who asked that question about the, I don't even know what I asked now. I have such terrible memory problems, but see, my knees give out a lot because my thighs are really weak. Okay, right now I'm wearing the basic white propylene, whatever it's called, brace. Okay, and it goes under the knee. I have a flap that goes over my knee. And so I'm just wondering what would work best for me, because I'm tired of falling. I mean, when I fall, I go down hard and I always hurt myself. I've tried a KFO that goes all the way up to my hips, but with those, I can't even sit on the toilet. I get so many pinch spots. I mean, I don't know. I don't know where to go anymore.
Right there, yeah. Well, ground reaction, it doesn't matter what the mechanism of it is. It can be a solid ankle ground reaction AFO, which is what you have now. Or it can be ground reaction can be limited with the NeuroSwing ankle joint, or across a blue rocker that's set up just to block dorsiflexion anyway. If you already have a polypropylene brace, the regular plastic one that comes all the way up onto your knee, that's probably the best ground reaction you can have. Now, that being said, my good friend out in San Diego, Marmaduke Loke, he makes a custom dynamic carbon AFO that goes up onto the knee a little higher than most. And he also extends the foot plate out further forward so that the ground reaction force is greater. I mean, you have to get a longer shoe. But he can really, I've never seen a brace optimize ground reaction as well as his does. And if that's enough, you could avoid going to a KAFO by getting something like that. And even if your orthotist at Hanger could extend that foot plate out longer, you know, it doesn't have to be by much. You know, sometimes an inch is all it takes. And that can create a strong enough ground reaction force that it would stabilize that knee while you're walking.
Okay, yeah, I was thinking about something that comes about mid-calf, but he is so worried about me falling and breaking that bone right there.
you want to maximize the leverage. So you've really got to come all the way up onto really the very top of your tibia, that lower bone in your leg. The taller that is, and the longer the foot piece is, the stronger the force to hold that knee from buckling forward.
All right. Thank you, Ken.
How's your balance, Lacey?
My balance is not good at all.
Yeah, so the ground reaction will help you with that piece too. You should be able to stand in open space, look at the ceiling tiles over your head, and things like that. If you can't, then you've got to go further up.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I can't do that now. I'm always wall surfing or holding on to somebody. So yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much, Ken.
All right, Ken, we have a couple more questions here. One kind of similar in category. Is there an outside the shoe AFO that will help with push off?
Help with push off. I'm not aware of one, no. That a Canadian one that we talked about earlier, the Extern, that's an external, a real exoskeletal AFO. But yeah, I don't know any other ones that do that, no, that will help with push off.
That's why I'm asking. I was wondering if there's a TurboMed-like that helps with push off.
Yeah, there isn't, unfortunately.
Right. Thank you.
Yeah, welcome.
And then some questions about the people that have worn SAFOs. What do you think of those? Do you like capped here GRAFOs?
GRA, ground reaction AFO. What was that first part you said, Amy? I'm so sorry. Could you repeat that?
SAFOs.
Oh, silicone AFOs. Silicone AFOs made by Dorset in England are pretty much an exclusive of Hanger nowadays. But that brace there was originally touted as a CMT brace. It was very cosmetic. It looked pretty nice around the foot, and it was supposed to help with, foot drop, balance, a little bit of everything. And the truth is, the word little is the operative term. It does help a little bit with all those things. But if somebody has a lot of proprioceptive loss and poor balance, if they have a lot of ankle instability and they're always rolling their ankles, it's not going to help with propulsion either. It's just not strong enough to do that. It can be a nice brace for those that are mildly affected with CMT. But if you can't walk on your toes and you have pretty strong balance or a pretty significant, varus deformity in your foot, it's not going to be much help functionally.
And then with the ground reaction, they're asking specifically with kids.
Kids for ground reaction. Usually it's not necessary with children. With kids with CMT, say under 10 years old, usually the disease hasn't progressed to the point where they're going to need ground reaction. Now, I do have some kids in ground reaction AFOs, those little Aled calls kitty gate braces, and they're terrific. But those are for patients with more unique issues. A lot of times idiopathic toe walking they have idiopathic toe walking and they also have CMT. And I've seen my patients being referred to as CMT, and really it's more the idiopathic toe walking that has to be just broken first. And so for that, a ground reaction AFO works great. You can put them into a nice little ground reaction AFO and break up the toe walking habit, and then assess their strength later after that's broken up. But generally, I find you don't really need ground reaction AFOs for children under 10.